welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by two authors who are here to discuss a shared work in a series that I absolutely adore from a press that I absolutely adore. I am so excited for this conversation and to discuss these two very, very creepy novelettes. So let's get into it. Welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourselves and your books, please?
Yes, my name's Sonora Taylor. I have been writing for almost 10 years at this point, at least writing professionally. I mean, all of us started much earlier than that. But yeah, I this is my first entry in the Split Scream series. My story is called Passing Glance. I write both short stories and novels, and in this case, a novelette.
And I'm Matthew Pritt. I've also been writing for about 10 years. My story is called Lash Egg. It is a rural folk horror. It is the longest story I've had come out in a number of years. My first attempt at a novelette. So also my first entry into the Split Scream series.
Very cool. So my first question for each of you is about everything that came before Split Scream. Tell us a little bit about your writing journeys and perhaps some of those other projects that you hinted at.
Yeah, so my the first thing I wrote was a young adult superhero novel. It's called The Soups. It came out in 2017. Then I wrote a sequel to that, which ultimately did not end up getting published. And then I've been writing some novels that I haven't really had success getting published, and also got into some short stories where I have had quite a bit of success, particularly in horror and literary fiction. So Lash Egg, the story that is in this Split Scream, started as a short story, and eventually I decided that it wasn't working the way it needed to as a short story, and so I tried to expand it into a novelette, and I think it worked a lot better that way. But I write in a lot of different genres. I've had a little bit of trouble focusing on any specific genre and establishing myself in any certain thing. So I've written some fantasy, some science fiction, literary, poetry, or just a little bit of everything, whatever I feel like writing on any given day.
My first book also came out in 2017. I self-published a very short collection of short stories, and there were four of them, called The Crow's Gift and Other Tales. And after that, I also put out a first novel called Please Give, which was a more of like an office rom-com than horror, but everything else I've put out since has been horror. Pretty evenly split at the moment between short story collections and novels. My second novel and my third short story collection were both what kind of like got put some more attention on me beyond friends and family. Those were Without Condition and Little Paranoia stories, respectively. Little Paranoias in particular has been my most popular release to date. It's a collection of mostly flash fiction, along with some regular-sized short stories and a couple of poems. And I was surprised when in summer 2022 it had a sudden boom. Like it was just, and it had been out for 3 years at that point. And I'm still not really sure where it originated because I'm not on TikTok and I didn't see where it was on Instagram, but I'm very grateful for it. It still sells to this day. I've also most recently put out a short story collection that's more of an omnibus called All the Pieces Coming Together, Collected Works. That's out with Manta Press, and that's kind of a good like from 2016 to now piece, and it ends with two pieces that had never been published before. So up until the release of Split Scream, that is my most recent release. And I actually wrote Passing Glance. It started as a story as part of a project I was working on with another author named Steve Strad, and we decided together to take the project in a different direction, leaving the novelettes we'd written for that piece free to do with what we will. So I saw that Tenebrous was open for novelettes. I submitted my work and they accepted it. So I was very happy with that. I had been published by them before in their Brave New Weird series, but never like as a kind of I mean, I would count this as a standalone, even though it's shared with Matthew Pritt because it's two of our pieces together as a shared novelette. And I'm a big fan of the press. I've read a lot of their pieces. So
Yeah, that actually is a great segue into my question and even begins to answer it because I was curious about whether, when you get involved in split screen, if you submit together or if they do the sort of like pairing of stories themselves, and it sounds like the latter.
it is. Yeah, they put out a call for novelettes and they pick the two they think go with the theme they see happening for that volume, I believe.
Yeah, when I actually read Sonora's story, I was almost surprised at how well they went together because of how different they are. Um, and it was really neat seeing the behind the scenes on that, how they came to both of us, I believe, with their view of how these stories would connect. And for me, there was a little bit of, we want to do a little bit of editing with your story so it fits into the theme better. This is the theme. This is kind of what Sonora's story is and how they would fit together. So it was really neat to be on that end.
Yeah, that's a really interesting journey, and I'm very curious about the way that pairing two texts, can let them bring different things out in each other, like those themes, even though the stories are quite different in their settings and their characters. For each of you, my next question then is, what was the inception point for the story? Was it a character? Was it the setting? Was it a particular scary scenario? What was the seed from which your novelette started?
For me, it was the setting. So, the Moore Mansion, which is the fictional museum and hotel in my story that ends up being haunted, is based on a real museum in Washington, D.C. It's based on a very cool and eccentric museum called the O Street Mansion. And we went there actually for a work retreat at my former office. And you just go inside and you have like all these crazy decorations littered throughout. Like it was almost Halloween, so they had like this giant demon from Spirit Halloween next to like porcelain Victorian figures, stuff like that. It's very, very odd, but also very beautiful because there's all these like beautiful art pieces around. They actually host a lot of artists in residence, including, I think, of course, his name is escaping me right now, but the man who wrote the lyrics for the Muppet movie music. Paul Williams, I think is his name. He stayed there for a long time. The woman who sang jazz and won Best New Artist, I think her first name's Esmeralda. She was there for a long time. So it's just this really cool museum. And me being me, as I walk around like old, odd places, I try and see if I can pick up on if it's haunted. And I got the sense when I was walking around that the place itself wasn't haunted, but the mirrors were, because there were some old mirrors in the rooms that were kind of creeping me out. And normally I don't believe in haunted mirrors, but like in this place I did. And another key thing about the O Street Mansion is it has like over 100 hidden doors, and no one has found all of them. So I took all those pieces and created an entirely fictional museum in DC that instead of it has hidden passageways, and it's also just it's known for mirrors in every room. And so Dylan, the main character, discovers that there might be a hidden side to these mirrors that we're unaware of.
Lash Egg started initially as a side story to a novel I've been working on. It's a post-apocalyptic dark fantasy novel with these nature spirits, and it wasn't working quite the way I wanted to, so I wanted to just step away from that project and just focus on a different side of that world, maybe try out some things that wouldn't be happening in the regular book I was working on. And so that's where it started as kind of a short story, and then I really liked where it was. I disconnected it from that book, made some changes, and ultimately expanded it. And I may end up going back to that book eventually with Lash Egg having been more fleshed out and change it to be more like Lash Egg, because I think Lash Egg worked a lot better than the book that I was working on. Sometimes I do that when I'm writing something. If I get stuck on it, I just go to a different spot in the world and come up with new characters. And eventually, if it's working, it can be its own thing. If there are parts of it that are working, I can usually fold them back into the main work. But for Lash Egg, I thought it worked better as a standalone.
That's very interesting to me how, world building can then be an engine for plot or character and sort of for story itself, which is great because my next question is about world building. And I love that I get to ask that about both like this very surreal, frightening but beautiful rural landscape and about a mansion in DC. That's a really fun pairing. So could you talk about then, specifically when it comes to world building, when you have the short span of a novelette, how do you decide what to show, what to hint at, and what to leave entirely unexplained?
For my world, where the story focuses so much on our main character, Ben, and his relationship with both his daughter and the land that he has fled to, I really wanted to keep the focus more to the land of the doe as well as the land of the bear, where he came from. And so in the broader novel that I had been working on there, I think I had 10 or so different areas. And so some of the ones that I hinted at briefly exist in that other story, but I wanted to keep the focus as tight as possible on Ben, where he was living and where he came from. So I actually, when we were going through edits, one of the things that I was asked to do was to give hints at the broader world because it was maybe a little bit too small. So I was able to just add a couple of things here and there just to broaden the outskirts of the world without actually getting into the specifics of what's there.
It's funny, even though I like writing stories, I very much I don't like world building. A lot of times my first drafts are way too sparse and I have to add things to them as opposed to cutting things down because I just kind of want to get straight to the action, which, can be a detriment to the narrative, as the editor will say. So in this one, I mean, I knew I needed to do another thing I always have trouble doing in first drafts, which is describe what the place looks like. And I tried to just really get into like reveling in the eccentricity the way I did for like the Real O Street Mansion. But so I wanted to give a sense of what it looked like. And I also needed to give a history of the place so we would understand the haunting that happens afterward, which is why it was useful that you're in a museum, you have a tour guide. They're going to share the history of the house, but in a way that makes sense narratively. It was interesting to me because at first I was just kind of thinking like the mirrors and the mirrors are haunted, but then as I was coming up with like the origins of the mansion, I was thinking of a person who was like, why would he build a place that was so labyrinthine? Like, what was his purpose? And without revealing too much, he was trying to build a city within a city, like his own personal city he could control. And then it was just kind of interesting to think of the mirrors as like an accidental adding on of that. And because what happens with Dylan, the main character, is that instead of being a place to explore, it's a place to get lost in, and very literally, along with just kind of the other things that are captured throughout, like with the evil intent behind its building. So I think I was just kind of looking more at like the character-driven reasons for all of this happening, as opposed to just like, yes, the house is haunted, but it's haunted by the people who built it, or are haunted by their intentions when they crafted it. So that's ultimately what it came down to.
I really love the way that the history of the mansion intersects with the personalities of the people who are currently, within its walls on the evening of this 30th birthday party. I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about Dylan and her friend group here, and maybe particularly like evoking that period of life, right? Like a little bit after college, you're kind of in your 20s, you think of yourself as an adult, but like, are you? So yeah, like go into building out that friend group and how that related to your storytelling aims.
Yeah, well, one of the things I found so interesting about the friend group is that even though, so they all have somewhat grown apart because as adults you start, having jobs. None of the people in this friend group have children yet, but you're getting to the point where things are just naturally pulling you away, and it's not because of any kind of falling out. Life just happens. But Dylan in particular is kind of the outlier in this group. I mean, everyone else seems really happy to see each other, whereas only like people are happy to see Dylan, but for different reasons. She always feels kind of like away from the group. And at the same time, as we find out pretty early on, some of that is her own doing because she's not really intent on staying in touch with them. And in fact, one of the only reasons she even comes to this party is because a man in the group she had a crush on is going to be there and she wants to try and sleep with him. So, it's one of those, I'm not going to tell people what to think, but I don't think Dylan's a very good friend. And so, like not in the sense that she's actively mean or terrible. It's just that, I just don't think she's a very good friend to these individuals, or not as good of a friend as she could be. And maybe she learns that, but I think that also made her ripe for being plucked out from the friend group into the horrors of the house because they start because she's trying to get away from the friends who are coming to see her. She gets lost trying to hide from them. So that's really the conduit that starts everything. And so it's because of that separation that, frankly, she's been doing ever since graduation that it just kind of becomes, much larger without spoiling too much.
Yeah, it made me think about those early relationships, and how often, I guess at any age, we are sort of like very, very frequently projecting our own feelings onto other people, because Dylan does spend a lot of time being like, I don't think these people like me. And after a while,
Hmm.
it's like, I don't think you like these people.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, Dylan, maybe there's a reason they don't
Yeah.
like you, and it's not just because they're being assholes, it's because you're not really trying.
Matthew, so I have a question about your world as well and character building Ben and his relationship to his daughter. I'm really, really fascinated by his relationship to his daughter Lydia, as well as to his new home in the territory of the Doe. And without, spoiling too much, I'm trying to be really careful. How did how did Ben's character development relate to the kind of story that you wanted to tell?
So Lash Egg was very much informed by my father. I grew up in a mixed religion household. So my mom was a Christian and my dad belonged to a different faith. I believe it was the Baha'i faith, which I don't know too much about that faith. I know his views personally were kind of Unitarian. He believed that all major religions hold some sort of truth. And so got to the point, if you're raising a child in a mixed household like that, you kind of have to decide how they're going to be raised. And because we grew up in West Virginia and Southern Ohio, kind of in the same rural area, Christianity was the main religion there. And so he made the decision to have me be raised in church, in a Christian church, even though he was not a believer himself. And so I was thinking as I wrote Lash Egg a lot about how difficult that must have been for him to, if everything goes right, his child would not believe the same things as him and would not see the world in the same way. And so, living in the land of the doe, Ben is trying to raise his daughter to please the nature spirits there. And where he comes from a different place and sees the world differently, it's very hard for him to do that, but it's some sometimes best for his daughter to have a place where she can belong, a place where she can grow up and be together with everybody. And so that was kind of what informed a lot of his character development within the story, is that tension between your own history, your own personal beliefs, and what is best for your children.
It was really poignant and beautiful in a lot of ways, and his struggle was very resonant to me. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on with Ben and the traumatic experiences that he had before landing in the Doe's territory. And it made me think a lot about like hypervigilance, and how it can protect us, but it can also sort of be a maladaptive defense, if that makes sense. And yeah, I'm sort of like curious about how, um, yeah, his experiences in the past also sort of inform the way that he relates to his new community. If that does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yes. When I was growing up again in church, there would always be a lot of speakers who would come in and talk about how crazy their lives had been before, and you'd have these talks about like these dramatic conversion experiences, and that was designed to bring people closer. I think it was a lot of sensationalism at the time. Um, but I always got the impression that someone who went through a lot of those difficulties earlier in life would have a difficult time almost believing that a more peaceful, calm life could be possible, even. And in the world of Lash Egg, where I wrote, it's kind of necessary for them as a community to survive to keep that peace and calm. And so when Ben is coming from a very traumatic background, ultimately the root of his trouble with his faith is that I've seen things that you all haven't, and it is making it hard for me to believe that what you have here is real. And yeah, it does become a pretty big hindrance to him to fitting in his new land because he's just seen things that they haven't.
And I really enjoy the complexity of, not going to say too much, but there aren't really any bad actors in this story that are human anyway, you know?
Mhm.
It's everybody
Yes.
just sort of trying to do what they think is best for their community and for each other. And yeah, I think it's they're both such lovely pieces, and I really enjoy what they bring out in each other by the pairing. How did when you saw the volume, assuming that you have seen the physical copy in its finished form, was anything new in your own piece shown to you just by the juxtaposition or reading the two together? Did you get anything new out of it? Any new insights? Yeah, how did you respond to each other's pieces and how that saw your own? That's a huge question, I just realized, but
As I was reading Sonora's piece, I couldn't help but view it through the lens of cursed places, the theme. I might have read it differently going in if I didn't have that knowledge of how it was intended to be thematically tied to my own. And so I think as I was reading through Passing Glance, I focused a lot more on the setting, on the haunted house, on the various details of the rooms and mirrors and things, and how the setting itself was more hostile to Dylan than pretty much anything else. And it wasn't necessarily that she was making it mad or anything like that, where you mentioned that in Lash Egg there's not really a bad actor. That I kind of felt the same way about Passing Glance. And so I thought that was a neat thematic tie-in that I might not have immediately noticed had it not been for the pairing.
Yeah, and I do apologize. I haven't had a chance to read the full volume yet, so but I do plan to soon. But I do like the idea of like the pairing of a cursed land and a cursed home. Like, I think, it's important. I mean, obviously, I wrote kind of a typical haunted house story, and it would have been easy to say, let's just put two haunted house stories together. So I think it speaks to a lot that we have a lot of different ways that we can say someone or something is haunted. Because, a lot of times in the stories, I do think that places can be haunted, but again, like I said before, it's what the people who were in it leave behind. And so I think it's the question of it's not just a cursed place, who cursed it, and how are people still feeling that curse going forward?
that is such an interesting point, and it relates, I think, to one of my favorite questions that appeared, I believe, in the introduction to the volume about how a place can turn on the people living in it. And I think that that is something that's so interesting to consider with both your stories about what it means if. In your story, if a house turns on you, or in yours, Matthew, if the land itself turns on you, they're so different in setting and in scale in some ways, and in the types of characters who inhabit the stories, but they do bring such interesting things out in each other. And it was such a pleasure to read them together. Well, my last question always is what is on your respective horizons? Are you writing right now? What lays in your future?
For me, I am always working on a number of different things. I usually have four or five short stories that I'm working on, either like in the back of my head or actively. And I have about four half to mostly finished novels that I really need to figure out how to finish. So I'm working on one that's set in a Magical Cat Cafe, which is very different to Lash Egg, sort of a cozy fantasy story. So I'm trying to finish that one first before I move on to something else.
And I have a short novel on submission. It's about a cooking TV show host who, it's a serial killer story about a cooking TV show host and her cameraman. I'm calling it like Natural Born Killers meets the Pioneer Woman. So I am shopping that around with some indie publishers. So fingers crossed that soon it will find a home. And in the meantime, right now I'm working on a new short story that is not to keep talking in comps. It's a girl who lives very alone with her father, and then needs to go into town on her own to pick up some pads and meet someone who takes a weird interest in her. But the story is kind of like Room, the book about the boy raised in the shed, meets The Face on the Back of the Milk Carton.
Those both sound really fascinating and like very interesting turns from the projects here that we're talking about. Thank you
Mhm.
so much to both of you for taking the time to share your work with me and our listeners. I'm so excited to introduce this work to people. It's been great. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, listeners, please check out the entire Split Scream series, but in particular, right now, check out Volume 8, which contains Passing Glance and Lash Egg. They're both absolutely wonderful pieces, and you will love them as I did. All right, thank you for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.